feel like I'm probably gonna boot up Tomb Raider Anniversary Edition. Never played a Tomb Raider game before, so that'll be interesting. Uh, but one thing I do want to sort of discuss while I'm playing is video game meta. How it's been, how it just makes games less fun. I don't know. If look, I'm not saying anything about the quality of person that uses the meta in video games. If you came to the conclusions of a meta build by yourself and through your own creativity, more power to you. However, in my experience, that tends to feel bad when I see like a large volume of players using the same build. And like maybe that's just a me thing, but I don't know. Perfect example for me has been Elden Ring. I've got 419, almost 420 hours in the game. Yeah, 419.4. 39 of the 42 achievements of just missing endings and the collect all the legendary armaments achievement. But regardless, I think I don't know, it feels really good in that game to just experiment with builds and come up with like weird and wacky nonsense to go through the game or to go into PvP with. Being said, I just kind of see a lot of the same builds cropping up. And like, sure, that could be for balance reasons, right? You got like the top 5 builds, let's say, are like 20% more powerful than the rest of them. Something like that. And that's probably like a drastic exaggeration. But what it tends to be more like is that the top builds are about 5 to 10% better than the rest of the builds. In most games, not necessarily like Elden Ring. Haven't done the math for it. But it ends up being I don't know. It just discourages me playing. And like, this is all like from personal experience. I'd love to hear other people's thoughts on this. But for me, like seeing so many people use the same meta builds and not like experiment with their own creativity, uh, it just discourages me from playing because I always like seeing like and battling like different builds and seeing like things that I've never seen before. But when it's the same things over and over again, Rivers of Blood, Tablet Shield, Vike Spear, those sorts of things, double bleed Naginatas, like people just running the hell away with Bloodhound Step until they run out of blue flasks, that sort of thing. It just becomes boring. That's really all there is to it. It's like there are no real new challenges. It's just, okay, can I wait for you to run out of the things you're doing, or can I find that one opening that those builds provide? And a lot of the times, like those builds, especially like the early Elden Ring meta builds, they weren't actually the best builds, in my opinion. Like, I don't know. my opinion, the best build is the one that your opponent hasn't seen enough, and therefore needs to develop a strategy on the fly to deal with it. And they just may not have the equipment to deal with it. Or they may not have the stats to deal with it. This, that, or the other thing. Or they just, they haven't seen it before. So they're scrambling to think of a way to overcome this new challenge. I think it's fun for both players if that is the case on both sides. I don't know what you're using, you don't know what I'm using. We find out together, we learn from it, we move on. It's just kind of interesting that, and I see like a lot of content creators make sort of build guides or like just PvP videos of like, I'm using this build. And then you see, what do you see? Next day, or even that same day, you'll see people invading or doing duels that are in that same exact build, but it's droves of them. Or, I don't know. I think a meta is always going to crop up, but the real question is, how much better is the meta from the average build? And I think, I don't know. I feel like when it's in that like 5 to 10% range, that's where you see the most people gravitating towards the meta, whereas there's the least balance done to compensate for that shift in the player base. If it's like, 20-30%, like I was exaggerating earlier, obviously the devs want to balance that out, even the playing field. And yeah, there's gonna be some combos in every game that like one person figures out. Everybody's got to try it a little bit until it gets patched out, because there's just one very specific combination of skills and items that the devs weren't thinking were going to be put together, and they end up being put together. World of Warcraft had very and continues to have very almost degenerate like one-shot builds and whatnot. But that game's ship has sailed a long time ago. They couldn't balance that game if they fucking tried. Who knows about the quote-unquote new team, or I guess team under new management, but whatever. Mostly, this whole rant stemmed from Elden Ring. And the fact that I love that game. I still do. But after 420 hours with it, I got... and most of that time, I should preface, most of that time was single-player experience. I loved just going through, my initial playthrough was 220 hours. Because I just wanted to get done as much as possible, see as much of the game in the first playthrough. And with Elden Ring, that's you can't do everything in one playthrough. So I went back to do it again and again, and set new challenges, try new builds out. It's a cool werewolf sort of build that I stuck at soul level 80 or rune level 80. Just to try out the PvP and do invasions and whatnot. And what I found very quickly is, one, claws are certainly an interesting weapon in PvP. The range is something you definitely need to be wary of. But I don't know, that game of like being outranged or like getting inside and doing the damage against like a spear or something like that. That's interesting to me. Like finding the spacing when you're at a disadvantage. But it gets to a point where I don't know. It gets to a point where I think people just get tired of it. And I've seen it in the Elden Ring sort of PvP community, like of content creators like Genie, like Lost, like Prod, like and like what's the other guy? His name escapes me. Scott Jund, I think his name is. Yeah. All these guys bring up very valid points when it comes to the PvP community. They're drenched in it, let's say. But I just feel like there's a good chunk of the Elden Ring community that looks at those guys and they think, oh, Soulsborne players, like this is my Chad Elden Ring. I'm gonna do what I want. I'm gonna play the meta just to spite you. And like, yeah, there are those people in Dark Souls 3 PvP as well. They're gonna greatsword's gonna greatsword. But it's I just feel like because of the mass appeal of Elden Ring, it's exacerbated this problem. Like you don't see very many games nowadays with this that had the player base of Elden Ring at launch and subsequent weeks after that get this sort of PvP meta, unless you have like an MMO, which honestly I would kind of consider Elden Ring a bit of an MMO. It's like an MMO light, since it's sort of instanced. But yeah, I don't know. I'd love to hear what other people think about this because it's I don't know. I've just gotten bored with a lot of competitive games because it just boils down to you using the meta. No, can't play. Sorry. Or you're gonna have a hell of a time trying. Uh, Magic the Gathering, another huge example of that. You have modern and like even CEDH. CEDH is the perfect example actually, because EDH in my opinion is most fun when you have like what is it, the Command Zone guys, people who do that podcast or YouTube channel, they had coined sort of like the power scale of like decks being like 1 is sort of like the jankiest of the jank, and 10 being like tournament ready, like potentially tournament winning sort of builds. Like EDH or Elder Dragon Highland or Commander, whatever you want to call it, in my opinion, is most fun when you have those decks around 6 and 7 power level. It's a little bit of jank, but it's mostly themes and creativity based on, you know, the person that you're fighting, what cards they like, how they would cast spells if they were a wizard, you know. But you lose that sort of fantasy, in my opinion, when you get into the competitive aspect, because then it's all about the game of it and not necessarily like the atmosphere that fantasy provides. And like, not to say that every competitive game needs sort of like mystique about it, but things with, like, I don't know, I've seen the potential of these games, and it saddens me sort of to see where they go, you know, into the sort of ultra competitive metamancer type shit, instead of like, I've used my creativity to build this this, this sort of character, this sort of deck, what have you, is unique to my playstyle. And you know what? Fair play to some people. Like, their playstyle may just be what's hot shit right now. And like, to those people I say, I'm sorry that you get lumped in with the metamancers. Uh, One thing that I did, like, pretty early on, like directly after my first playthrough, was I had a character called and I helped a lot of people through stuff, mostly Radon, with a character that I deemed the Sultan of Swing. It was, the turban, the horns. Like, I used every horn. It's like a something like a 45-ish or 50 strength and like 60 faith sort of build. Some sort of nonsense like that. I think it's soul level like 165, rune level 165. I'm just gonna call it soul level because I'm the Dark Souls old head. But right after I started that sort of playthrough, I started seeing like the horn build just crop up more and more in videos on YouTube, and it just, like, as much as I was like, okay, cool, people are coming to this same conclusion, but it's also a bit of a meta build now. Not necessarily after the patch, and it might not have even necessarily been a meta build to begin with. However, just the fact that it cropped up so often in that short span of time that it just completely discouraged me from using it. Because I say, okay, well, if I were to PvP with this, people know what to expect from this build. I can't get the drop on them. I can't really make them laugh with my build, or like entertain them with an encounter with this character, because they've seen it before. And like, that may be the case, that may not be the case, depends on the person. But that's just kind of my takeaway from it, you know. Yeah. Meta has kind of, I don't know, kind of sours the experience of like a competitive game that has a sort of, I don't know, feel like you can either be immersed in the game aspect or you can be immersed in the competition aspect. And I think a lot more people tend to be immersed in the competitive nature of things like Elden Ring or Magic the Gathering, so on and so forth. And you know what? Like, I'm not trying to like poo-poo people that want to be the best. You know, I get it. It's fun to be on top. Pause. But if I just feel like that's a hollow experience if you don't. Personally, like, for me, it's a hollow experience if you don't come to that conclusion on your own. Because, like, I don't know, it does feel pretty damn good to come to like the conclusions of like, oh, this could be really good. Oh, this is broken good. That feels nice, and be feeling like, oh, nobody's found this yet. And testing that out, seeing how that fares against the current meta. But that process of discovery and experimentation, I feel like is lost on the average player. And you know what? Fair play. Not everybody has like 6 to 8 hours a day to game. You know, not everybody, not everybody's unemployed. And no offense to people that are, the job market sucks right now. I'm one of those people. Like, not everybody's a teenager, like on summer vacation from high school. Not everybody's, taking a break from college. And it is what it is. I just feel like when this sort of issue crops up, where you have people bored of the meta, and there's no sort of room for experimentation with that meta, just because everybody's like, you use the meta or you lose, simple as that. Then you just sort of drive players away from your game. I feel like it's on the developers to try and rein that in, that difference between what is technically the meta and what's the average build, into like at the most like a factor of 2 or 3%. I would think that's like, that's where it's playable, in my opinion. Like typically, like ideally, you want everything to be like, you know what, I would say, yeah, like within a factor of like 3%, because it's gonna feel bad if you don't, have more powerful things towards the end of the game, like have more powerful toys than others. Like their hat, and like with Magic the Gathering, the whole rarity system, there's gonna be shit cards because there kind of has to be shit cards in order for there to be good cards. Otherwise, they're just cards. And I feel like it might not be a fair comparison between Magic and Elden Ring because of the whole secondary market of Magic, making it buku bucks. But yeah, I don't know. I'm gonna grab a drink. I'm gonna find a game to play. But that's pretty much my discussion on the whole meta nonsense. But yeah.
I don't like the looks of this. Stay alert, man.
That's all I got right now.
Centaurs! Where is the wise man known as Chiron? Arqueros, are you all right? Of course not. I've walked this road many times. I've never seen this before, however.